Okay. Here we are. My name's Tim Carrigas. I'm a ex-physiotherapist turned personal trainer, and it's the 18th of November. I'm chatting with Pete O'Sullivan. Thank you for joining me, Pete. And
Pleasure.
Pete's a
Not an ex-physiotherapist.
not an ex. Yeah, I say that because it is relevant. Would you agree? Yeah, yeah.
There's no ex attached to
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah, yeah.
physiotherapy.
I've divorced a long time ago. But
I'm
yeah.
off, you divorce.
Yeah, he's not your average physio, I think is an
I don't know how
understatement.
you
Yeah. Well,
define
no.
it.
So
But
Peter is he's a active clinician and researcher in Perth, and he's had a long and distinguished career in both clinical practice and research. And I think that's all I'd like to say about you. Would you like to add anything?
no, no,
So
but
yeah,
only to say that I I wear two hats.
yeah, yeah.
But I work with real people with real problems, and I work
Mm,
in an institution that does research into that. And so I'm constantly walking between these two places, which
mm,
is development of knowledge and
yeah.
testing of hypotheses. And then I work in a clinical space, which
Mm,
actually kind of tests hypotheses on an N of one. I kind of
yes.
see my clinical work as a form of research, actually, in
Yeah.
that we see someone with a problem and you set about testing hypotheses
Mm,
around based on the knowledge that you have.
yeah.
And it's N of one, which is highly limited and
Hmm.
open to lots of um, interpretation.
Yeah. It has been an interesting feature of your career that from quite an early point in your career, you were straddling those two worlds.
Yeah.
And
And
it's
that was for a reason, Tim.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Because when I graduated,
I'm paying you a compliment.
yeah, yeah, no, but it's interesting. I was reflecting on this. I was at a
Mm,
conference in New Zealand, which is where my career began.
mm,
So I trained there. And I remember as a student going to our library and there was literally no research articles. And I was
mm,
like, what are we being taught? And what is the
mm,
basis on what I've been taught? And I realized that actually there was very little basis to anything that I've been
mm.
taught. And that was just ideas that were passed down and down and down and down generations. And
Yep.
in my head, I'm like, well, either I'm going to participate in this profession and test
Hmm.
what I've been taught and test the beliefs that I've been taught, my own personal beliefs, or I've got to get out.
Yep.
So that's really what spurred me to be involved in research is that
Mm,
there was literally no evidence,
mm,
anything that we did, or very little evidence for anything we did back then.
yep.
And so across my career, I suppose I've seen this massive explosion of research that's
Mm,
emerged in the pain space because there was almost no research in pain because it doesn't kill you. It,
yep.
it ruins your life, but doesn't end your life. And so
What doesn't
historically,
kill
a lot
you
of the
only,
research has been into heart disease and stroke and
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
cancer and stuff that kills you, not stuff that limits you or disables you.
What doesn't kill you only permanently disables you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and pain is, I mean,
Mm,
I focus that on back pain because it is the leading cause of disability of any health condition that
mm,
exists, which is incredible, really.
yep. The I was going to say something else about yeah, it's I've listened to you being interviewed about cognitive functional therapy, and
Mm.
it really did stick out at me how you were kind of recounting your career and how
Mhm.
you initially were doing research into uh, the muscles in
Mm.
the abs and in the back, and that then when you went to kind of implement that paradigm, which you were kind of heavily involved in developing, and it
Massively.
wasn't yielding, it wasn't working. Yeah, and so you were, yeah, you kind of can correct me if I'm wrong. You have had a bit of an anguished journey to kind of
Totally.
find
Yeah,
answers.
my
Yeah.
whole career's been anguished. I could say my life, but maybe the career, but
Yeah,
for this
yeah,
conversation.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I think what it highlighted is that we're incredibly belief driven as human
Mhm.
beings. Like,
Yeah,
we have a position, we have a view,
yeah,
we inherit it. And pain's really interesting because we basically learn pain from such a young age, from our parents,
Yeah.
from the people around us, our peers, and how we interact with people, and
Mm.
then interactions in healthcare, etc. But a lot of our beliefs, or what we call a discourse in society, are
Mm-hmm.
completely unfounded, not
Mm.
founded by any evidence at all.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the treatments around pain are not founded, they're
Mm.
beliefs based on beliefs.
Yeah. Your description of
It's
how
kind of
you
scary.
yeah. No, I agree. And your description of how you your dismay at finding the lack of research at the start of your career when you're a student resonates with me. And I think and that I also, and I'm not a physiotherapist, but I have but I'm a person working in, I say, with it's the health field, right? Helping people to get better at exercise and make it part of their life and enjoy it. And I have objective questions to bring to the research, but even to this day I still feel a like I have some reticence to take the research at face value, and that's kind of so so I guess I share with you in some sense um a level of frustration or bewilderment. Maybe yours has been substantially resolved and mine hasn't, but and that's kind of maybe the point of our disagreement as well. So
I think it's true.
yeah,
I
yeah.
honestly think it is because, like,
Mm,
I look at the beginning of my career, there was none.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
literally, I've had to morph my clinical journey
Mm,
through the lens of growing a massive body of knowledge,
mm,
which I think is incredibly hard to negotiate for
mm-hmm.
clinicians. And
Yep,
the crazy part that I see is the majority of care for people in pain isn't evidence-based. So,
yeah,
so, and if it
mm,
was, I think the world would be a much better place.
mm-hmm. Yep,
And that's probably where we differ because I place a lot of weight on evidence.
mm. I would like to. My, I guess maybe what I said. Let me talk about the thing I put up on LinkedIn. So I wrote something that was I regretted. I basically said um
I've
I
got it
don't,
here if
yeah,
you
yeah,
read
please, can you read it out? No, please
it.
do. Can you? Are you
Because I
happy to do
went
that?
back to it
Yeah.
and it was
Yeah, and
like,
so I basically threw out an insult, which was wrong, and for
uh,
which I'm sorry.
the
But
insult bit didn't worry me.
right.
It was more that, like, I don't care. Literally, if you're in the world of research, it is probably one of the most brutal
Mm-hmm.
world. Peer review is like three people
Mm.
bagging you out when you
Yeah.
get peer reviewed and finding fault in anything
Yeah.
and everything they can possibly do. Often it's peer
Yeah.
review.
I'd
It
like
is
to hear more about it.
it
But
is
are you happy?
brutal.
Yeah. Can you read out what I said to begin with, and then we
Oh yeah,
can
well
chat
there
more?
are a couple of things particularly that concern
Mm.
me.
Yeah.
Um, if I can find it. Um, uh, Trends has emerged where people in the medical field and allied health, which is me, seem to think that truth is determined by consensus and expert opinion. Well, that was the first thing I was like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is evidenced by the reflexive deference to academic journals in which the rot is plain to see. The rot. So that's me. I'm rot
Mm-hmm.
because I publish all my rot gets published in academic journals. And my team's rot as well.
Mm.
I believe, I
Yeah,
believe
and it was out of line. I'm sorry. Yeah,
yeah, no,
yeah, it
it's
was.
all
Yeah,
right. No,
but
that's
yeah,
why I
no,
reacted
it's
though. It's
fair.
like,
It's fair game.
get
That's fine. Yeah.
it. I believe many people who think they follow evidence-based practice are willfully ignorant of the many substantive issues in the research enterprise, such as publication bias or outright data falsification. And that's the other bit. I was like, whoa, like, what's your evidence for data falsification? Because it's not something that, it's certainly not something we practice. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I think it's very disparaging of the majority of academics who are genuinely interested in building knowledge, testing
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, and shifting their opinion based on the evidence that is
Hmm.
before.
Yeah,
Um,
it
so then
was.
the next comment was the continue high trust in journals and research institutions unfounded, which again I thought was quite shocking. You said I find it alarming, and then you made a comment. Many of these people, if they were transported back in time to the trial of Galileo, would probably find themselves on the side of the Catholic Church, favoring dogma and officialdom over the truth. So I was like, whoa. And that's why I reacted.
Yeah, yeah. And I it's
And,
good that
and
you
I
reacted.
appreciate you made an apology for that. And
Mm,
so I suppose what would be interesting to know
mm,
is because I spend my life, half
hmm.
my life in an academic institution, working with academics all around the world,
Hmm.
um, and based on that, interpreting, because it's all about
Hmm.
interpretation, interpreting that knowledge through the lens of the fact that I work with people in pain to go, what does this mean for you as a clinician and you for a person, a consumer
Hmm.
who's wrestling? Because essentially, people are wrestling with questions, right?
Hmm.
Like today, people coming in, I've been at the clinic all day.
Yep.
I've had numerous people coming in with pain, disabling pain, scary pain,
Hmm.
anxiety provoking pain, functionally limiting pain, going, what's going on and what do I do about it?
Mm.
And they're the questions that I have to ask every day in my practice. So I lean on knowledge and evidence for that.
Yeah. As a point of clarification, I'm not against the abolition of research.
You're not
I'm
against it, or you're
no,
not?
no, I'm not against it. Yeah. I who could fault evidence-based practice, right? I think
No. Yeah. So carry on. Yeah.
yeah, the issue I believe is um, that there are issues in the way evidence-based practice is pursued. So, like, while I do retract the insult, it was wrong for me to be insulting like that. But I still, like I said, when we chatted before this recording started, I still feel as a punter looking on from the sidelines and someone who I guess is it my position is not dissimilar to the one I would probably be in had I continued to work as a physio. Like I finished in 19, I finished in 2000, and say I didn't become an academic, I would still be a consumer of the journals.
Mm.
But I don't think the average physio in the community um, has the time to really get across the way research is done. So the function of the journals was meant to be you should be able to go to that and not need to remember your statistics training.
Yeah.
But I think from what I followed this field of meta research as an interested bystander, and I think that from the things that I've heard about it, again, such as it's called the reproducibility crisis in open medicine, in reproducibility crisis in medicine. My understanding is that's quite pervasive in the fields that do hypothesis-driven research in health. It was originally uncovered in psychology um, by a group in America, I think, around about 2014. It's called the Reproducibility Project. Well, there was a group led by a guy called Brian Nosek in the United States, and they set out to reproduce a number of the key findings in psychology to basically to rerun the experiments, and they found that they had a very low success rate of doing that. And it kind of for that group it highlighted the potential for bias in research, and they were very surprised at the low replication rate, and so these people they've kind of run with that ball, and according to them and many others, there is a crisis of sorts in biomedical research because of the um, because of different factors, including the incentives at play and the kind of research methodologies and how that is done. Um, so yeah, that is being an observer of that has caused me to be less confident than I was trained to be.
So maybe can I, because you've kind of brought up a lot of things there.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and we kind of see that in research as levels of evidence, right?
Yes.
So if you look at levels of evidence, then the lowest level of evidence is a case study.
Hmm.
It's like someone comes in, you go, oh, we'll do this and we'll see what happens. Like that's a really low level of evidence because you don't know if that person was going to get better anyway. So let's say the
Hmm.
person gets better. And so back pain's a good example of this,
Hmm.
where there are lots of trials that have been done for acute back pain. And
Hmm.
people go, oh, I've done manipulation, or I've done dry needling, or I've done massage, or I've done iridology, or I've done reflexology, or I've,
Hmm.
you know, done Reiki or whatever,
Yeah.
and I've got better. But if you look at the
Mm.
natural history of acute back pain, most people get better anyway.
Yeah.
So then if you look at the study, so that's one level of
Hmm.
like you look at a case and you go, why do they get better? So that's why you need a control group.
Yeah.
What a control group does, it says, well, okay, we'll take a group of people. So
Hmm.
that's a high level of evidence, and you randomize them. So there's no bias in who gets into each group, and you test two different things. So it might be
Hmm.
a control arm, which gets nothing, or
Hmm.
it might be a control arm that gets a placebo, for example.
Yeah.
Right. So a placebo for, say, acupuncture is kind of easy because you can
Hmm.
makes it look like you've pierced the skin. You feel a prick, but it doesn't pierce the
Yeah.
skin.
Yeah. I heard
And
those.
those
That's pretty
studies
nifty.
pretty much show that that just believing it pierces the skin is the same as it piercing the skin.
Yeah.
That's really important for people who are practicing needling because
Yes.
actually it tells us that the active ingredient, those people might have improved. The active ingredient wasn't actually the piercing of the skin, it's
Yeah.
the belief that it pierced the skin.
Yeah.
Um, then there's another kind of control arm, which might be nothing. So
Hmm.
just tracking natural history,
Hmm.
looking at actually these people are going to get better anyway, doing nothing.
Mm.
So all the intervention is done as track natural history. And that's why the control arm is so
Mm.
important because it allows you to ask different questions of the data.
Hmm.
Now, let's say you have a trial that's positive, for example. So we've been involved in lots of different trials.
Hmm.
And so this comes to your question of replication,
Hmm.
because a single trial is a single trial.
Yeah.
And there could be lots of potential biases like the recruitment. Where did those
Hmm.
people come from? Were they people seeking care or not seeking care?
Yeah.
They people who, had a bias towards thinking that was going to be beneficial for them or not. So
Hmm.
that's why that's why journals make you be really descriptive of who was in that group. They
Hmm.
also make you really descriptive of how you recruited them.
Mm.
They also make you disclose if you've got vested interests. So
Hmm.
if I'm selling a product that's testing this thing, I have to disclose that
Hmm.
because we know those things can create bias.
Hmm.
So let's say that for example, announced the first trial at CFT was in Norway, and it was against highly skilled manual therapists
Hmm.
in that country. So we used a really strong control arm. But Norway, how replicable is Norway? Norway is a very, very wealthy country,
Hmm.
pretty much free healthcare,
Mm.
low so like high socioeconomic, highly educated.
Tons of oil money.
Sorry, yeah,
Tons
they
of
make
oil.
loads of money off
Yeah.
oil.
Yeah.
So how can you replicate that in another country?
Hmm.
And so the follow-up trial was in Ireland. Mary O'Keefe ran that trial.
Mm.
Completely different scenario,
Hmm.
much tougher group. And the other trial was in low disability.
Yeah.
This was a much higher disability, pain comorbidities, not just back pain, mental health problems, comorbid other pain problems, much tougher trial, different question.
Yeah.
The question was, how does individualized care compare to group-based exercise and education? So that was another small trial. Now, there were problems with those two trials in that there were quite high levels of dropout. And
Hmm.
so the criticism was, well, you can't really trust these results because the
Mm.
dropout high. So that's why
Mm.
we did the Restore trial, two arms,
Hmm.
18. In other words, the other criticism was, well, you're highly trained three clinicians. Not many people can do that. So the
Hmm.
Restore trial was 18 clinicians, two centers,
Yeah.
Sydney and Perth. We trained them so that we knew what they were doing,
Yeah.
and then when compared it to usual care. So
Mm.
and there was very few dropouts. We've got a 12-month follow-up and a 3-year follow-up.
Hmm.
So that's a much higher level of evidence, right?
Yeah.
Now, the problem with an RCT, it's not real world. So
Mm-hmm.
then you have to do another replication. So we've
Yep.
been doing a whole bunch of implementation trials,
Mm-hmm.
real world. That means we're going to train up a group of clinicians in your care setting
Yep.
so that they're not opting in. They're just coming for care. They don't know what the care
Yep.
they're going to get. So that's another level. And
Mm.
again, go if we replicate this on a number of different areas and different care settings and
Mm.
different people with different methodologies, are we seeing the same thing? And if we're not, why not?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you can't rely on a single trial for
Mm-hmm.
evidence. You look for, and that's why meta-analyses and systematic reviews are the next step
Mm-hmm.
up from an RCT. Because what
Yep.
they do is then say, okay, let's look at all the research that's available and all the
Mm-hmm.
trials. Let's pull the data and let's look at the differences between these trials and let's see what it's telling us. And a systematic review
Mm.
looks at the credibility of the evidence, the strength of the methodology, looks at the inclusion criteria, control interventions.
Mm-hmm.
It's really robust. And most systematic reviews tend to show, well, there's a little bit there, but not much.
Mm.
And that's considering replication.
Right.
Does that make sense? But
Yeah.
implementation actually is the key
Mm-hmm.
because sadly, most research isn't implemented.
In the sense that that they don't go the next step like you're describing from the
Yeah.
kind of theoretical, more
The
theoretical.
real
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
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 That means you go into Royal Perth Hospital
Yeah.
with back pain, you get this kind of care.
Mm.
Or someone comes in to see me and they get this kind of care.
Yeah.
Is the care you're getting evidence informed or not?
Yes.
And there's heaps of
Mm.
care in our community that's not.
Yeah. What you're describing sounds really robust, and I've heard from you and from other people about the peer review process being really hardcore.
Tough, yeah.
Yeah.
Super tough.
So I'm interested today or some other time. I'd love to hear more
Hmm.
about it. Right. I also hear from people that what I have read, I won't misrepresent my that I've had personal discussions with people, but um the what I've read is that there are various biases that can creep in involving the statistical analysis. So, for example, if a trial is not prospectively registered, there's flexibility for a statistically significant result to be found where there perhaps isn't one. And
Okay, can
so,
I hold
yeah,
that
yeah,
question?
sure.
It's almost impossible now
Mm,
to get a trial published that wasn't prospectively registered. I think it's
mm,
not possible actually.
yeah.
So literally before you start the trial,
Mm-hmm,
you set up your protocol,
mm-hmm,
it gets peer reviewed. So the Restore trial with the protocol
mm-hmm.
was published and
Yeah,
registered before the trial happened.
yeah.
There's
When
no
do you
way
think?
you get a paper published in the Lancet that
Yeah,
wasn't, or any reputable journal.
yeah.
Now, the other thing on that, Tim, is there's
Mm.
lots of dodgy,
Predatory journals. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and they're the ones that I say don't go near. We get
Mm-hmm.
asked to review in them, we get asked to send papers to them, we
Yeah,
don't go near
yeah,
because they're the ones that they're publishing dodgy brothers research.
yeah. What time frame do you think that kind of rule or de facto rule has been in place?
Last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but,
Before that, so
mm,
this is where the whole world of research has kind of realized these
mm,
possibilities for
yeah,
bias
yeah,
and it massively tightened up.
yeah,
But I don't think any journal, reputable journal, would publish a trial that
mm,
wasn't pre-registered.
yeah,
And any deviation from
mm-hmm,
your pre-registration has to be completely documented.
okay,
And a reviewer will look at your pre-registration and scrutinize it against your paper.
mm-hmm,
So it's literally not possible now to do that. Now, in terms of the credibility of the stats, so
mm-hmm,
any big clinical trial now has blind statisticians. That means the statisticians do not know the groups.
mm-hmm,
And high quality trials, like in our trial,
mm,
it had an independent biostatistician who was blind to groups, and then a second one
mm,
did the analysis. So
Can I?
two blind, it's
Yeah,
like two blind biostatisticians who were not aware of the groups, then
yeah.
look at that.
And that I would like to kind of place that to one side and talk about it again later, because I did find that when you mentioned that in a LinkedIn comment, I found that like I would have assumed, or I would assume that there are many RCTs that where there is not the resources to have a like in-house statistician like that. But
Any RCT, Tim,
mm,
that is published in a reputable journal will have
hmm
significant funding behind it.
hmm yeah, I mean, and
So
that,
blinding is really important. If you look at
mm,
look at the levels of evidence, blinding is so important. So that you can't. It's like you don't know.
right.
You're dealing with numbers. You're not
Mm,
dealing. You have no idea of who the groups are. It's completely blind.
mm. In there's a there's a paper I've read recently in preparing for this discussion, and it's by a guy in America, Sean Riley. So he's
I
at
never
the
trust Americans straight up.
yeah. Well, I'll blind you to his country of origin. It's in the
Tongue
archives
in
of
cheek, by the way, for any Americans who might hear
okay.
this.
So this is in the archives of
Just
physiotherapy.
remember that
Yeah.
most Americans voted for Trump. So there's something seriously wrong with that
This
country.
is very unlike you to get political. I mean, this this group, and from this is something I've become aware of in the last week, so I don't pretend to be all across it, right? But his name's Sean Riley. He's at the Hartford. Anyway, this paper was published in Archives of Physiotherapy, 2023. It's called Trustworthiness, Confidence in Estimated Effects, and confidently translating research into clinical practice. Um, Now, this is he's describing in here a 2021 methodological systematic review of RCTs involving musculoskeletal physio interventions published in ISPJE member journals, right? So that's International Society Physiotherapy Journal editors. And that includes papers like, I can read you the list. So it's BMC musculoskeletal disorders, Brazilian Journal of Physical Therapy, Journal of Manual and Manipulative Therapy, Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy, Manual Therapy, Physiotherapy Research International. There's a list of them, and I know you've published in Manual Therapy, so this is
It doesn't exist anymore, actually.
okay.
Manual therapy doesn't exist as a journal anymore. It's got another name.
Well, the paper I'm looking at was written in 2021, so that could be out of date. Um,
Yeah.
it I believe the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy is still current.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
anyway, in this, he's describing a methodological systematic review of RCTs, and these were done between 2016 and 2020. And they it it found that these studies it could not be determined if researchers followed their original research question, followed their methods, or reported their study consistent with the established research record 64.5% of the time. This was secondary to the RCTs being retrospectively registered, unregistered, or having unclear registration. So
I
there's a
think that comes back to what we were saying earlier, is that if you look at the last 10 years,
Mhm. Well, this is
that
within the last 10
tightened up
years.
massively.
Yeah.
So if we've got a systematic review
hmm
that's assessed RCTs
hmm
where there was no registration of of the protocol,
that
then
was rare. It was
yeah,
more
so
common that they were retrospectively registered.
yeah, so even that, like now
hmm
you could get that published.
mm
So, so what that person's saying is
hmm
be careful how you interpret data based on retrospectively or non-registered RCTs because they could be
Yeah.
biased. That's what he's saying, or
hmm
I think it's a he. So I haven't
Yes.
read it, but
Yeah.
that's completely valid.
Yeah.
But that is not contemporary research.
Well, that if that's the case, that's encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but like, yeah, I wouldn't want to go and check that. Yeah. Because he's describing, he's writing in these.
So I can promise you now, I
Sure.
don't, I'm pretty certain
Mm.
Well, knowing the current editor of Joe's
Hmm.
PT, really good person, Clara Dern,
Mm.
um, like there's no way they would touch a trial
Hmm.
that hadn't been prospectively registered. Any good journal wouldn't touch it.
Well, that's great. I'm happy to hear it. Yeah, and that does give me a higher degree of confidence in
Yeah. And
I
so that kind of comment, I think is really important. It's like just it's like I think you highlighted earlier, like as a clinician,
mm,
one of my biggest beefs around the journal industry, and it is
mm,
an industry,
yeah.
uh, is that most of it's behind closed doors. You're
Hmm.
forced to write in a way which is kind of journal speak, which
Hmm.
is really hard for clinicians to interpret.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, the level with biostats now, I can't, like, I
Mm,
use, Professor Ann Smith, who works with us,
mm,
the brain the size of a universe.
mm,
I ask her,
yeah.
like, that's her job. She's
Mm,
like so clever. So it's become so technical. You need technical people who that is their expertise. Same with
yeah.
the likes of an economic analysis is
Mm,
done by an economist.
yeah.
So research has become massively technical. So I think what it highlights, Tim, is that probably to when first first started talking, where we come from, say in the micro,
Hmm.
which is spans, scarily amount of years,
Yeah.
um, from literally nothing,
Mm,
no research to or very little research to this massive increase in research. And some of the early work was like when I first did my first trial, I couldn't even register a protocol. It wasn't even a
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So now that's completely changed because we realized that actually those trials would be open to bias,
Yeah.
lots of reasons.
Yeah. And I my the reason for my lack of confidence, rightly or wrongly, was belief that these issues with bias are not really well handled at the
I
moment.
think they're really tough now.
Mm,
I think it's
yeah.
so, and that's why I was keen to chat to you because
Mm,
it really concerns me when these statements come out like, oh, you can't trust the research. I'm like, wow. Like I look at the rigor
mm,
behind the work that is done, incredible rigor. And I think the other thing is that if you look at where we come from, we're not here to prove something. We want to learn.
hmm.
It's
Yeah.
literally like, what can we learn? There's not a study that we've done where we haven't learned
Hmm.
something we never thought about.
Yeah.
And that's so cool because it's like, whoa, that's not what we thought. What does it mean? How do we interpret it? And that's
Mm,
probably the second bit is the interpretation,
hmm.
because a lot of research tells you something, in a broad sense, but it doesn't really tell you a lot about the individual. And that's why
Hmm.
our group has done a lot more qualitative research to go, what's the lived experience for that person?
Hmm.
And that's about the individual. And I think both are really important because an
Yeah.
RCT tells you about a mean. It
Yeah.
doesn't tell you about the person who got really better or the person who didn't get better.
Yeah.
It tells you about the middle person.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Where
That's it.
qualitative research tells
Mm,
you about the individual.
mm. Or you could have a situation where someone, but goes through one of the interventions you've been trialing, and they don't experience a reduction in pain, but they can do a lot more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and
But
they're really
but
happy
we
about it.
do have measures for that,
Right. Yeah.
because we capture a whole range of
Hmm.
outcomes.
Yeah.
Um, but it's true because I think what that taps into as well is that, we've inherited a system which is really based on
Hmm.
drug trials.
Hmm.
And we've inherited outcome measures
Mm.
that may not be relevant for that individual.
Mm.
And I don't know if you've read a paper that was published this year called What are the Competencies of a Pain Clinician? Have you
No.
read?
No.
Oh, you'd enjoy that
Yeah.
because, well, maybe you wouldn't, but I think you.
Hopefully, maybe after we
But,
finish chatting, I will.
but one of the things in that, one of the points in that journal was around person-centered care, which is I'm
Hmm.
a huge proponent of
Yeah.
person-centered care. And that is, are we actually measuring the
Mm.
things that are important for that person?
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. I saw a guy today and he's been really, really disabled with back pain.
Hmm.
What's his goals? To play golf, to surf, to
Mm.
play basketball with his kids, and to be able to be safe to lift and bend and twist awkwardly.
Hmm.
I don't know any questionnaires that
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
outcome measures. So the
Yeah.
questionnaires are very generic, and they probably don't, but I know they don't
Mm.
include any of them.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did in the Restore trial is to include a person-specific functional
Mm.
measure to say, what are the three things that you struggle most with,
Mm.
and use that as an outcome measure. So the patient-specific measures
Mm.
capture something about the individual, which the generic questionnaires don't do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's do you ever feel like has there been a case ever been a um have you ever faced a situation where a therapy you feel is valuable has come up with a negative trial result, and it's kind of caused you to pause in your tracks and say, well, I'm not sure if that I disagree with the way that was done, or I can see that it doesn't have application for the way I use it. Does that ring true with you?
Yeah, probably not so much, probably more around tracking an individual, and they're
Mm.
like, I'm back doing A, B, C, and D, but the outcome measures
Mm.
weren't specific for
Yep.
them.
Yep.
And so and that's where I come back to what's important for the person is the key.
Yep.
And if we're not measuring what's important for the person, we should change what we measure.
Mm. Yeah,
And
I
that comes down to, like, look at pain scores, for example. And I have a lot of these discussions with
mhm.
people because I think in the pain research, there's this
Mm.
obsession on VAS scores, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay, it's a numerical score. So what's your pain rating? It's like, oh, 7 or 6 or whatever. But actually, people come to see us not because they've got a 6 out of 10.
Mm.
They come to see us because they don't know what's going on. They
Yeah.
might be really frightened about it. They
Mm.
might think it's going to stop them working. They're
Yeah.
worried they can't do the things in life that give them value. And so, better measures than a pain score might be pain interference score.
Hmm.
It might be a pain bothersome score, a pain anxiety score,
Yeah.
not a pain intensity score. Because you would know if you have a workout, how much pain do you have in a workout?
Well, I did the Free half marathon last weekend,
Yeah, so how
and
much pain was it?
yeah, I was in a fair bit of pain last
Yeah,
week. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Out of
yeah.
10, what was it at its worst?
Oh, 4. But then
Okay.
maybe I did it in an hour 33, 40, Pete. So maybe I've got a high
Awesome.
pain tolerance.
Yeah, but if you think
Yeah.
about it, if you're doing a workout
Mm.
with a customer or a
Yeah.
client and you're building strength, how
Yeah.
much pain will you incur?
Yeah. There's no right answer. Yeah.
No, there's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So it's all about meaning, right? Because
Mm.
the
Yeah.
meaning behind the pain that you get when you're having a workout is like, this is
Mm.
hurting me. It's
Yeah.
making me strong.
Yeah,
So there's
and one person
positive
will
meaning
interpret it
behind the pain.
positively. One person it'll be like, yeah, this is great. I feel like Rocky Balboa. Another person will be, is my
Exactly.
back going to break? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So it's
yeah.
completely individual. But I
Mm.
think what I'm tapping into here is that often the things that we measure might not be
Hmm.
things that are important for the person.
Yeah. You said something the about how something you said, I can't remember what it was, got me remembering so I read a book called Hypocrisy, and it
Oh
was
yeah,
yeah, because I heard you interview her, and
Rochelle
I
Bookman.
thought, yeah, yeah, it was really good. And the book was very good. One thing I found when I was reading in there, and she was talking about the subgroup fallacy,
Yeah,
and and I confess to being a believer in that fallacy.
me
Like I
too.
think, yeah, yeah, this there we go. We're of one mind.
Got that in
Yeah,
common. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm keen to hear more about the you, your experience with peer review. You said it's a really grueling process, and
Yeah,
can you
really.
talk more about that? What kind of things happen?
Yeah. So, look, peer review is your work is, and that's why we encourage, our PhD students and and colleagues not to take their work personally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because it's like, if you
Mm,
think of a PhD, you spent probably 4 years of your
yeah,
life dedicated to something, someone just completely destroys it,
yeah.
which can feel like a terrible thing. Um, but a peer review process follows a process essentially of like going, is the research is the research question clear?
Mm,
What have you adequately identified the problem?
mm,
Have you adequately identified the research question? Is the methodology set up to answer the question? Is the
mm-hmm,
methodology rigorous? Are the statistical analyses capable of answering the question?
mm-hmm,
Have and then there's all these layers that go into that around, if it's an RCT, for example, well, you won't even get past review. You won't
mm,
even get review unless you tick a whole lot of boxes. But
yeah,
if you do get past review, so for like the Lancet, that was five different reviewers,
wow, yeah.
and
Did,
it was pages
mm,
of pages and pages of critique and comment and well, mainly critique. That was the
mm,
most rigorous thing we've ever
yeah,
experienced. Most often it's three, at the very most, well, at the very
mm,
least, two reviewers. And then you've got an editor. So it's like you've got an editor, you got reviewers, and then the
mm,
editor's kind of like looks at the reviewers, reads your article, and gives you some guidance. But for the top journals now, most often they just reject you. They don't even send it out to review.
right. When you say the top journals, like what proportion of journals that are kind of there's no, I mean, I don't expect you to have a rock solid answer to this, but
Yeah.
what proportion of the journals that are kind of in functional use in, say, physio practice would you
Yeah.
consider to be top journals?
I think, if you think about journals where they would have a very high quality of peer review,
Mm,
um, JOSPT,
hmm
Journal of Physio, um, physical therapy, disability and rehabilitation, musculoskeletal medicine and practice. Like that could, that, probably missed out a whole bunch, but like they're rigorous now.
mm,
They're not, you can't just send your stuff in and get it published.
yeah,
And the other thing is just to highlight, lots of times we get our work rejected.
mm,
Doesn't he, they review it and say, nah. Um, and and almost always, I would say, and almost invariably, um, the work is better when it's being peer reviewed
mm,
because it doesn't allow you, it really checks your bias.
hmm
That's what peer review is good for, is to
yeah,
check your bias.
yeah. It's an interesting experience to
And
hear.
and, and to be sorry, and be really
Mm,
transparent around strengths and weaknesses of the
mm,
paper. These are how generalizable is this? What does it mean for a clinician?
mm.
You know, where are the weaknesses of this research? They force you to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you describe this, it does sound, it does inspire confidence, and so I that's good. I would like to have more confidence, um, and I think for someone like me who's kind of inclined towards being maybe cynical to the point of skeptical to the point of being cynical, and a kind
Mm,
of inclined towards a kind of contrarian worldview.
yeah.
Um, um, I maybe I'm in my echo chamber where I'm hearing only the kind of
Well,
the
that's
people,
what worried me, which is why
right?
I wanted to talk to you, because I'm also in an echo chamber,
Yeah,
Tim. Remember?
yeah,
But my echo chamber is kind of like the
mm,
living, breathing process of doing
yeah,
research.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's why I was like, wow, I've got to talk to you because that is not the world I live in.
yeah,
Like it's opposite to the world I
mm,
live in. Like the
but that,
level of scrutiny is so
mm,
high.
yeah, there are people in your world who are talking in a contrarian way, who do what you do, and are kind of have a very different opinion about the research enterprise than you do. And I think because probably just by virtue of my personality, I'm probably drawn to that way of thinking and drawn to those people. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because
Yeah, right.
it's it is it does challenge me to think to hear you talk about how bloody hard it is, and
Really.
yeah, and I know you personally, and I think I would, I have no question that you have good intentions and that you do a really good job. I know that personally. Um, then the yeah, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, but so yeah, it kind of I guess it is a challenge for me to kind of to reconcile this varying input from people, all of whom I respect. I guess I believe that it's if a question, if a practical question before me is pretty low risk, the
Mm,
stakes are lower. It doesn't
exactly.
really matter as much. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with
Yeah.
that. So,
It's
can you give me an example of a contrarian position? Because that's
oh
probably
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, John Ioannidis. Have you heard of him? So John
Uh,
Ioannidis, he is he's a doctor. Um uh he's at he's the head of the Stanford University there's a meta research group there.
but give me a practical example of someone in my field who would hold a contrary worldview to me.
Well, I
Let's
don't
stick to the management of pain because that's
yeah,
something I,
I don't know. No, I don't know, but I think
because that's what
maybe
I was thinking. So,
mm,
if you look at the debate out there, for
mm,
example, I don't know how much you followed the physio world, but there's debates around, manual therapy or not manual therapy,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's like a kind of big one out there.
yeah.
And I'm a manual therapist, right?
Hmm.
So,
Mm,
well, so how important is it for me to do stuff to people versus
hmm.
teach them to do stuff for themselves?
Mm,
Well, I know as a manual therapist, I can do for a lot of patients, I can
mm,
do stuff to someone
hmm.
and it will give them pain relief,
Yeah.
right? But I also know that I can
Mm,
teach people to do stuff for themselves and it
mm,
will also give them pain relief.
yeah.
And they can do it at home and they
Yeah.
can
For
do
a
it when they
fraction of the
need it.
cost.
And yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they don't need me.
yeah.
So this debate, I don't think is about, oh, it's this or that. It's more like, so I'll give you an example. A lady I
Hmm.
saw about 4 weeks ago who had really disabling back pain.
Mm,
And at the end of the session, spent an hour with her
yeah.
and took the history and examined her and da 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 da. And at the end of the session, she said, "Are you going to treat me?"
Right.
Literally, as I was about to finish up. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
I
"Actually,
just
I
have.
have." And she's going, "But don't you think I need a rub?" And I said, "But look, you told me you've
Mm,
seen dozens of people in the last 4 years
mm,
who have done stuff to you and it never
mm,
lasted.
mm,
You want me to do that as well?" Or
mm,
would you like to have a strategy that gives you long-term ability to manage this in a way
mm.
that you get back to the things you love? So that
What'd you
was my
say?
question. He's going, probably the latter.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen her two more times. And the
Mm,
last session, she goes, I can't believe how much better I am. I'm
hmm.
so grateful because I now know I
Mm,
don't need treatment. I've got it. I can manage this
yeah.
myself. So that's such a cool thing in my
Hmm.
job. So, probably a bit like you, Tim. I'm really big on empowering people
Hmm.
to be able to care for themselves. To
Yeah.
me, that's what good healthcare is. It's about giving people good knowledge and then giving them the tools and
Mm,
building capacity to care for themselves
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
That's the care
100%.
I want when I seek care for my own, if I ever seek care for my own
Yeah.
health
Yeah.
issue.
When was
The
the
care
last
I
time
would
you
want
saw a
is the
physio?
care I would want to give others. Now, that's not to say that there are some
Mm,
people where I will use hands-on
yeah.
approaches just to reduce their level of distress if I
Yeah.
can't give them ways of doing it themselves. And that's just about being kind and caring.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
there's
think,
no way in hell I would have that person coming back as a revolving door because to me that's bad healthcare.
yeah. I guess part of the venom in my initial statement slash insult was because and this is kind of this is Tim talking kind of culture here, right? So I feel like I get a vibe from when people in the scientific world talk with a degree of certainty that's unwarranted
Right.
about their what they think they know. So I believe we should be quite humble about what we know.
Totally.
Yeah, but for some reason, for some reason it doesn't seem to come across, not with you, but with in that sort of study brandishing behavior. And I think there are
I don't
different
know.
reasons.
Look, maybe Tim, that reflects who's prominent on, who's publicly prominent because the
Mm,
majority of researchers
mm,
aren't publicly prominent.
yep.
Like the majority of people in our
Yes.
research team, you will never hear. because they're not publicly prominent, but
Yeah.
they're the most humble,
Yeah.
genuine, smart,
Yeah.
um, principled human beings that I've had the privilege to work with.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
don't hear them because they're busy doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. What I want, and maybe it's there and I'm just not sensitive enough to hear it, is people in the research world expressing the provisional nature of scientific understanding. And that because I just reflect back on my own journey, first of all studying physio and then working that for a few years, it not being for me, and then observing, just being, doing other things and observing fields like that field and others like it. And I remember some of the things I was taught were unscientific to a really terrible degree.
Me
And
too.
it was like it did have the bit of a vibe of the Naked Emperor. Do you
Mm.
know what I mean by that? Like I have a vivid memory of the first third year um, uh, spine manual therapy prac or class, and I was like, I remember thinking to myself like what? Like push on that, and you should be able to feel it
Yeah,
moving. And
totally.
but I've observed myself kind of indoctrinate myself, and I've convinced myself that all of that stuff was really accurate and worthwhile doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe it is worthwhile in a certain context. But so I've gone through that
Not doing
experience.
what we were taught it does.
Yeah, for sure. But I guess I feel like at the time we should have known that and been a bit more. I should have been less suggestible, and the people in charge maybe should have been
Yeah.
more reflective.
I think that is such an important reflection.
Mm, mm,
And that is I kind of, how I look at it as an educator and
mm,
a researcher,
mm,
probably one of our biggest responsibilities is to um, be self-reflective, brutally honest,
mm.
humble, and realize we don't have all the answers. Like we
Yeah,
don't. There
mm,
are people we see who we can't help.
yeah,
Like, what do we know about those people? They're the people we want to do research on
yeah,
because we want to know what it was that, and maybe it's because we don't have the tools or the skills to help that person
yeah,
in that with that problem. So I kind of see it in our world as improving the odds because I see a
yeah,
lot of what I would say is iatrogenic harm.
yeah,
That means what people are told and the things that have
mm,
been done to them
yeah,
actually are harmful. I
yeah,
think there's a lot of harm done in health,
yeah,
and I think we need to do a lot less harm.
yeah,
So, I was involved with the low back pain clinical care standard, which is basically a roadmap of like,
yeah,
don't hurt people. At the
yeah, yeah.
very
Here are the
beginning,
acceptable guardrails.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
100%. And to me, it's like this is the game of rugby. It doesn't tell you how to kick a ball,
yeah,
but it just says these are the rule. This is the
yeah,
boundary which you should work on.
yeah,
Don't don't harm people. There's a lot of harm done in
yeah,
health.
yeah. And I
Um,
feel it's easy. It's relatively easy to harm people as a
It
healthcare
is, and
provider.
it can be our words. So
Yeah,
we can
yeah,
harm people, and I've done it. I know in my career, not
mm,
willingly or not knowingly,
yeah,
where I've created harm in the things I've told people.
yeah,
And most of the stuff that I learned when I was a young clinician, it's just
mm,
basically isn't true.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just stuff I've been told.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, I've also thought you look back at the history of evidence-based practice, and it sort of came as a movement responding to the culture in medicine, where it was like if if you're a registrar, a doctor, and there is, surgeon X has this opinion, surgeon Y has this opinion, and don't you dare cross them, don't you dare express any
Yeah.
skepticism or disbelief because they'll have the
Yeah, but
guts regardless.
that kind of sits in the hierarchical space. But to be
Mm,
fair, there's been a huge amount of benefit for
mm,
society, for us as individuals from evidence-based medicine.
mm.
Surgery is probably the least researched area of medicine, to be honest with you. So
Right.
it's probably not a very good measure of evidence-based practice. And
Yeah.
take the example of knee arthroscopy for
Hmm.
knee arthritis,
Mm.
which I think there've been 7 or 8 placebo blind trials showing it
Mm.
doesn't, it's not beneficial, but it's
Yeah.
still done. So,
Yeah.
there's an example of where
Mm.
we're not, the evidence is there and we're not following it.
Hmm.
Yeah, but and I think the other thing is when you've got vested interests in industries
Mm.
that seek to make profit
Hmm.
from research,
Mm.
then you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
If it's industry funded,
Yeah.
yeah, you got to be
But
really.
yeah. Do you feel
But you
like
need independent. You need
yeah,
independent replication of that.
yeah, I agree, and that's a powerful point. I don't wish to detract from it, but also I think there are vested interests in the world of research as well, right? Because there are careers to be made, and there can be big
Yeah,
egos.
I know that, but
Mm.
look,
It's small fry. Is that your point in relation to?
yeah,
Yeah,
look. There are so many checks and
yeah,
balances.
yeah,
It would be, I know there was one trial that we kind of looked at and went, those results just look way too good to be true.
yeah.
It's an Italian trial, it was a number of years
Mm.
ago. And there was a researcher who actually looked at the numbers and went,
Mm.
this is actually not true. This
Yeah.
is this is made. It can't reflect,
Mm.
so but that's really, I don't know of any other trial where
Mm.
that's been the case. Definitely in the earlier days when there wasn't prospective
Yeah.
registration and stuff,
Mm.
stuff was open to bias.
Yeah.
How you interpret your data will be
Mm.
open to bias, but that's why
Yes.
peer review tries to keep you straight and honest.
Yeah.
But we're humans are fallible,
Yes.
fundamentally fallible.
Yeah. No,
So
I do find it
questioning is really, really important.
yeah. And I've found it quite inspiring to read about, projects like the open science collaboration and hearing about registered reports and that sort of thing where it sounds like a great idea where you sort of you strap yourself to the mast and you say, this is what we're going to look at, this number of subjects.
Yeah.
This is
Well,
our
that is how we do everything now.
yeah. Well, that's really good. Yeah. Um the um I something you said about yeah, one thing I feel very passionately about is that I just feel it would be so much better if we as the public had lower expectations of certainty from healthcare professionals, because I think that puts a lot of pressure on the practitioner. If someone comes with an expectation that it's easy for you to figure out what's wrong, and it's simple and straightforward to give them the solution to fix it. Like I think when I was kind of enculturated into, there were three words you never said, I don't know. That was
Ah,
really that was kind of the unholy
it's
trinity.
so interesting.
Yeah, and it was like, so I remember, my you know first year of working as physio is in 2001, and it was just like you've got to bullshit your way through this sometimes. It's kind of like
Uh,
that's my memory. Memories can be inaccurate, but
I think that's awfully sad.
yeah.
Um, I'm incredibly honest as a
Mm.
practitioner.
Yeah.
Like, this is what we know. And I think one of the things that really pushed me into doing research is that I was treating symptoms. I had no
Hmm.
idea what I could have been treating cancer. I had
Mm.
no idea. I was just treating symptoms.
Yeah.
And that deeply unsettled me, which is one of
Yeah.
the reasons that I ended up doing research as part of my career.
Mm.
Um, uh, on the Pain Health website, you just made me think about
Mm.
something. It's got a section saying, what should I ask my healthcare practitioner?
Hmm.
So Pain Health was led by uh, Helen Slater, who's a
Mm.
professor at Curtin, who's clever. Like, you
Yeah.
wouldn't get a better human being than Helen. Um, and it says it's important to choose treatment options that are high value. This means most likely to give you the most benefit with the least risk and cost.
Mm.
Talking to your doctor or healthcare provider about possible tests or treatments for your back pain care. This is about back pain.
Yeah.
There are five quick key questions to ask. Number one, what is the evidence for this treatment? Number two,
Hmm.
what are the costs, benefits, and risks? Number three, how much of this treatment will I need? Number four, what can I do to help myself? And number
Mm.
five, can you please write this information down?
Yeah.
These five questions can help you to make sure you end up with the right amount of care, not too much and not too little.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's a click here to find more about choosing widely, wisely. But
Yep.
I reckon that's a really lovely kind of
Mm.
synopsis. And that's what I think when I treat people,
Yep.
when I work with people, is
Yep.
like, what's the evidence for this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how much
Yeah.
certainty have I got as a
Yes.
healthcare practitioner when I'm working with this person?
Yep.
How much is it going to cost? What are the benefits?
Yep.
And so I honestly talk to so many people. I'm like, how much money have you spent on your care in the last? Like,
Yeah.
what would you like to do with that
Yeah.
money if it wasn't on your healthcare?
Yeah.
Where would you go
Yeah.
on a holiday? Like, can we
That's
set a
right.
goal?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the really nice things for me about doing what I do now, as a trainer, has been, and running my own business, has been I've been able to kind of put myself in a position where like I make all the business decisions. So I'm totally free to enact my philosophy. So
Mm.
I find, and which is kind of like it's been a redeeming story for me, right? Given the past. And I think I'm often saying to people, look, I'm here to help you help yourself. You know, it's expensive to see me once, twice a week forever. But I want to kind of help you to become as independent as you want to be. That's
My job.
yeah, yeah. And it's
So we're both doing the same kind of thing then.
no, it's been yeah, it's been very cathartic for me to kind of for that to be on that journey and to be able to now with complete impunity to be able to
Yeah.
do that. Yeah.
But I think what that highlights is something that's
Mm,
been a massive bugbear for me. Like in 1996, I made a decision. I was working in private
mm,
practice and I knew I couldn't sustain doing what I was
yeah.
doing. So I set up on my own
Yeah.
in a one room. I rented a room and I
Yeah.
spent an hour with every new patient that came in and
Mm,
half an hour with the follow-ups. And I've never changed it. It's
mm,
probably been the best thing that sustained me in my work
yeah.
because I've got time.
Yeah.
I've got time to think. I've got
Yeah.
time to listen. I've got time to build a
Yeah.
plan. Probably been the best thing I made. And what unfortunately we've inherited in
Mm,
physio, I'll talk physio here,
yeah.
is we've inherited a system that is now not fit for purpose.
Mm,
You don't see a psychologist for 20 minutes
yeah. Mm,
with a chronic mental health problem.
yeah.
We shouldn't be seeing a clinician for 20 minutes for a chronic pain
Yes.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
A chronic
nuts.
back
It's
pain is different to an ankle sprain. Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah.
So that system, we've got ourselves locked in. To be
Mm,
fair, in the comp, you can get like a 1 hour rehab.
yeah.
But in the private space, it's you pay per session, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour. So
Yeah.
people who see me get the same rebate as someone who sees them for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Crazy,
Yeah. Yeah.
crazy. So we have to change the way we work because the
Mm,
way we work with the way we were taught is not up to
yeah.
date
But
evidence.
but has the profession kind of painted itself into a corner?
Massive,
Because there are
massive.
some that the insurers are going to be because some people will take the piss, and it'll be like,
Well, so we've got unpublished data at the moment that kind of looks at the low back pain clinical care
mm,
standard and looks at the obstacles for implementing it. So this is
yeah,
the federal agency saying this is
yeah,
how you treat back pain. The biggest thing that comes up is time. I don't have
yeah,
time. Well,
yeah,
I'm not funded to do it. To
yeah,
spend time to educate people takes time.
mm,
Like it's time.
yeah.
And
And what,
like,
yeah,
well, we've got to change the funding model
yeah,
because, in the Restore trial, we saved heaps of money
mm,
treating people
mm,
because they got back to work.
yeah. That's
It
great.
saves the community
Yeah.
so much
Mm.
money.
And I
So the
think
money
also,
saved for one person was like more than $5,000 across a
yeah,
year. Multiply that across years, and you
mm,
talk about huge financial benefits.
yeah. And what you're describing about what you did in the 90s there was kind of spending more time with people. I think also you probably did a whole bunch of learning that you would have never have
Massively,
done if you had just,
massively.
yeah. And so you
Totally.
then you get more efficient and you get better at spotting patterns and then
Yeah.
yeah, I think I saw a little graphic of someone the other day, someone put together that kind of illustrates this phenomenon where it was it's like someone trying to climb a ladder, and if the rungs are too big, they just keep falling down. It's probably like that with the clinicians, where they sort of you
Massively.
you need time to reflect and
But that's why we have so much dropout in the
mm,
profession as well, is
yeah,
that you're asking people to do a job that they
Mm.
can't do within the time constraints, to do a
Yep.
job well and the
Yep.
time constraints.
Mm. Yeah, and that kind of that, because I wrote an article about why I left physio, and it kind of went quasi viral on LinkedIn. That was interesting. A lot of people kind of said, that's still happening.
No, of
It's
course
pretty
it is.
sad. Yeah.
Until we change the fundamental funding model around how we care for people,
Mm.
it's going to continue. I mean, GP's way worse than us, though.
Mm.
Like general practice is really under the pump. I don't know how they do it. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it. And I made basically said I'm either going to stop doing what I'm doing or I'm going to change how I work.
Hmm.
That saved my career.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you made that decision, and I'm glad you could have this chat. It's been fun,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
cool. And look,
yeah.
I really appreciate your honesty.
Mm.
That's why it's good, I think, to have the opportunity to kind of because your concerns. I think maybe some of your statements were a little bit,
Yeah.
but your concerns are
Mm.
completely, they
Yeah.
reflect concerns that I have as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
and concerns a lot of people have. So I think it's great to have this discussion
Yeah. Yeah.
is this trustworthy? And also, how translatable is that
Mm.
study for my patient population in
Mm.
my context? They're
Yeah.
all questions that, we need to do a better job
Mm.
as clinicians, as researchers. And it kind of highlights, I think, this massive gap between
Hmm.
research and the clinical interface that
Yeah.
our group try to bridge all the
Yeah.
time. Go,
Yeah.
as clinicians, we see the real
Mm.
world. We can see there's a gap. How do we
Yeah.
bridge that?
Yeah. And I think the questions that seem to be the big questions, like if I could just look at my own area, it's like there's I don't know, people talk a lot about, oh, what's the optimal number of sessions a week to do
Right.
X, Y, Z? How much, what's the balance of slow versus
Yeah.
fast, and all that stuff. And I think, but
Mm.
what I do, and probably what do is probably quite similar to what a lot of exercise physiologists are doing. It'd be like, here's a person that doesn't enjoy exercising. How can I help them to enjoy it?
Yeah,
But
totally.
maybe I'm not looking in the right place for the answers, but
Yeah,
it's
100%.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
in the trials that we run,
Mm.
we go on exercises based on preference.
Mm.
Like physical activity is something every human being should have.
Mm.
In the real world, ideally a combination of cardio and strength,
Yep.
agility, balance, that kind of stuff is important. But if you have no choice, you
Yeah.
go, what is the one you're most likely to do?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Do it and do it often.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thanks for the chat. It's been really fun. And
Pleasure.
yeah, I'll stop our little recording if I can figure out how. Oh, here we go. Okay, thanks, Pete.